Boys and girls, the raging Nintendo fanboy is back at it again with the lies and nonsense. And the lie that the raging Nintendo fanboy is trying to push today is that Dark Souls, the entire franchise, sucks because it's a ripoff of Zelda. There's really not all that much more to say than that. I mean, that pretty much sums up everything you need to know about this video. So, we're looking at Harman Smith today, the notorious Nintendo fanboy. So, let's go ahead and find out why Dark Souls sucks.
The big thing that Souls fanboys always fall back on when it comes to the Zelda versus Souls debate.
I mean, I was completely unaware there was a debate going on. I mean, Zelda is more of a franchise based on puzzles and problem solving, things like that. Whereas Souls is more of a combat/boss focused game. But I forgot, when it comes to Nintendo fanboys, more specifically Harman Smith, anything that slightly resembles something that Nintendo has made is just an attack on Nintendo, just like the Steam Deck and the Nintendo Switch OLED.
Is that Dark Souls has better combat. Oh, so like enemies just swinging their blade at you and you blocking them is somehow better.
Say that you've never played through a Souls game without saying that you've never played through a Souls game. I mean, there are so many enemies in these games that are completely different than just an enemy swinging their blade at you. But then again, this is probably a guy who's never made it past the Undead Burg.
Forget the fact that like Zelda has so much more versatility. Forget the fact that you have so much more going on with like the weapon management and the armors and like the different weapon sets you can just switch between on the fly.
Switching between weapons on the fly isn't even exclusive to Zelda. I mean, you can literally do the exact same thing in the Souls game, which is more proof that you haven't even played the games. Plus, there is tons of weapon versatility in the Souls game. I mean, Elden Ring literally has like over 130 different weapons that all have different special attacks.
The fusions, the strategies you can take. Forget that like Zelda has so much more going on, like mechanics-wise.
First of all, I don't even think Zelda has more going on mechanically, but even if it did, more mechanics does not equal better game. Sometimes simplicity is just better.
That it's not even funny. Like, Dark Souls is better because it just is, okay? Like, that's the narrative, right? Because that's really all it comes down to, really, when it comes to, like, this idea that Dark Souls is a good franchise, is this myth that it has good combat.
I mean, personally, I think the combat of the Souls games is better than the combat of the Zelda games. It's almost like they're two different genres that are focused on different things. Zelda is more of a puzzle-focused game, whereas Dark Souls is a combat/boss fight-focused game. Holy shit.
Right? Never mind the enemies all look the same and move the same way and aren't really that much of a threat to you if you just stand in place and hold your shield up.
Yep, and this right here confirms that he has never played through a Souls game. This just proves it, dude. I mean, shielding does not work against every enemy. There are some enemies that will punish you in the Souls game for using shields too much, so you have to dodge their attacks, or you have to parry them. Also, he doesn't even bring up the games like Sekiro or Bloodborne, which I'm gonna consider Souls games, because, well, they're Soulsborne games, let's just be honest, where shielding does literally nothing, or in Sekiro's case, you don't even have a shield. Also, try using a shield against bosses in any of the Souls games. Like, try using a shield against the Elden Beast and tell me how well that goes.
Right? Never mind, like, the lack of real innovation in the Souls games since Demon Souls in 2008.
Since Demon Souls in 2008, let me list off some of the things they added. Power stancing/dual wielding, randomized dungeons via chalice dungeons in Bloodborne, the ability to respawn bosses via bonfire aesthetic, the open world formula, great runes, the addition of torrent in Elden Ring, the addition of the quickstep dodge in Bloodborne, the health regain mechanic when you play aggressively in Bloodborne, the ability to reinforce your Estus flask in Dark Souls, the weapon arts, etc, etc. I could keep going all day here. It's just obvious that this guy has no clue what the fuck he's talking about.
Never mind the lack of real evolution, the real gameplay. Like, never mind how boring Dark Souls was, even back in 2011.
It was so boring that it popularized the entire Souls format and created an entire new format of games called Souls-like games. Yeah, okay, dude.
Right? Like, forget about all that. Let's just pretend that Souls is better than Zelda because we desperately need something we can hold against the big N.
So this Nintendo fanboy is seriously trying to claim that the only reason the Souls series became popular is because people wanted something to hold against quote-unquote the big N. You have to be kidding me, dude. Like, you are a grown man doing this shit. It couldn't just be that the people happened to enjoy the series when they played one of the games in the series, could it? No, it just has to be that people are attacking Nintendo.
Right? Like, oh, like, it was like Dark Souls really was like the Baldur's Gate 3 of like the last decade. Because I remember when that was like a relevant talking point, when like people seriously pushed this narrative that Dark Souls had a better gameplay loop than Zelda did. You know, completely ignoring like Zelda's better pacing, you know, its better environments, you know, more
You can see even he himself is struggling to come up with some bullshit to throw into this video as to why Dark Souls is shit and Zelda is better. I mean, it could not just be the fact that people enjoyed Dark Souls and it has nothing to do with Zelda, could it? No.
better actual puzzles, right? You know,
Yeah, it couldn't just be the fact that they're different franchises, right? I mean, one is more based upon, like, boss fights, enemies, things like that, and the other is more based upon puzzles and exploration. Whoa, crazy concept, dude.
better dungeon design. Like, forget all of that. Forget all of that. Like, Dark Souls is better because it's harder, right? Like, that's all it comes down to. This is a game for real gamers.
I can't imagine calling myself a real gamer as some sort of flex or something like that, but dude, just say you couldn't beat the Asylum Demon and move on. Like, we know, dude, we get it. Like, it's okay to suck at the game.
You know, forget the fact that the game completely falls off after you get the Lord Vessel, right? Let's forget the second half of the game is garbage.
I mean, I will agree the second half of the game is nowhere near as good as the first half, but I don't think it's utter garbage. Like, the Duke's Archives was alright, that was pretty cool. It's just Lost Izalith and the Bed of Chaos that I think were a steaming pile of dog shit. But now that you bring that up, you know what's a shitty part of a Zelda game? That one dungeon in the Spirit Tracks that you have to go back to over and over and over and over again that sucks ass. You do realize that every single game is gonna have that one area that nobody really likes in it. I mean, maybe besides Bloodborne.
That nobody likes. Like, let's forget that, like, the game is only a couple of hours long if you know what you're doing.
That literally applies to 99.9% of games on planet fucking Earth, dude. I mean, I seen a speedrun for a Zelda game that was like 4 minutes long. So, does that mean that Zelda is shit because there's a person out there who beat it in 4 minutes?
Right? Like, let's forget about how broken the game is once you, like, learn the mechanics.
Let's forget about how broken the game is once you learn the mechanics. Bro, have you played Breath of the Wild? Have you seen some of the shit that people have done in that fucking game? Flying on boulders and shit straight to the final area? Oh, but I forgot, it's only okay when his favorite company has bugs in their game, not when FromSoft has bugs in their games.
Let's forget about all of that and just call Dark Souls the best game ever made because we haven't got anything else.
Nobody out here, well I don't think at least, is saying Dark Souls is the best game ever made. We just think it's an enjoyable game. That doesn't mean we hate Zelda and think it should burn in a fire and be shit on. I feel like this guy is just jealous because he didn't get to play Elden Ring or something, I don't know, but like he has such a huge like hard-on for hating on the Souls games.
That's what it comes down to, right? These people don't acknowledge Zelda's long history. They don't acknowledge multiple titles. They don't acknowledge the evolution of the series. And they certainly don't acknowledge that Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, is a better Dark Souls game than any Dark Souls game that's ever been produced.
What does this even mean, dude? If I want to play Dark Souls, it means I want a challenging 3D game with fun bosses, exploration, stuff like that. Fucking Zelda 2 is a 2D platforming side-scroller type game. What do these games have in common, dude? You're just pulling this shit straight out of your ass at this point.
Right? Like, it's crazy how much more compact, interesting, fun to play, challenging the NES Zeldas are compared to the hackneyed, played out, uninspired Dark Souls game.
Yeah, it's almost like they're two completely different games. One is a 2D kind of platforming game where you just swing your sword forward and kill enemies, like a very classic game, and it is a challenging game, I'm not gonna lie. However, the other is a 3D kind of RPG style game. Like, these have nothing in common.
Right? It's been the same thing over and over from Souls and their spin-off titles, right? Since its inception.
Yeah, tell me you've never played through the Souls games without telling me you've never played through the Souls games. Take a look at Dark Souls 1 or Demon Souls and compare it to Sekiro and seriously tell me that they're similar.
But Zelda innovated itself with A Link to the Past. It innovated with Ocarina of Time. It innovated with Skyward Sword. And it innovated with Breath of the Wild.
Okay, and the Souls games innovated as well. I mean, Dark Souls 1 came out and they added the reinforceable Estus flasks and things like that. Then Dark Souls 2 comes out, they added the respawning bosses via bonfire aesthetic, and they added the powers dancing. Then Bloodborne came out, they added the health regain mechanic where you play aggressively, you regain some health. Then Dark Souls 3 comes out, they added weapon arts. Then Sekiro comes out, they did a complete overhaul of the combat system and added like the weapon trees. And then when Elden Ring came out, they added the open world formula and torrent.
All you do is avoid getting hit and hit the enemy.
Well, no shit.
Yeah, the goal of almost every single video game on planet Earth is to avoid enemies attacking you and attack them when you get the chance. Dark Souls is no different. Zelda is no different. The game I'm playing in the background, COD Zombies, is no different. You take a look at the three games I just mentioned, yeah, the base game, like what you're doing is you're avoiding enemies and attacking when you can, but in completely different ways. In COD Zombies, in addition to avoiding enemies and attacking when you can, you're powering on perks, you're collecting points, opening doors, solving Easter eggs. With Dark Souls, in between hitting enemies and avoiding attacks, what you're doing is you're leveling up your weapons, you're using weapon arts, you're unlocking new areas, you're finding new pathways and shortcuts. And in a game like Zelda, you're not only just attacking enemies and dodging attacks, you're solving puzzles, you're getting new items to unlock new pathways, solving dungeons, collecting new items, weapon sets, armor sets. But you would never describe any of these three games as just avoiding enemies and attacking.
There's no technical complexity. The animations are stiff and asinine. They reuse enemy designs all the time.
I know you're not seriously gonna sit here and dog on the Souls series for reusing enemies when one of the biggest problems a lot of people had with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is the reusage of enemies.
Bosses are uninspired. They have one or two attacks.
Once again, because you've probably only ever played Dark Souls 1. Have you seen some of the bosses in Elden Ring and how many different fucking attacks they have? I mean, look at the Elden Beast, for example. Or take a look at a boss like Slave Knight Gale, where it has like 3 phases that all work completely differently with different movesets. But oh, I forgot, the only boss fight this guy's ever fought in the Souls series is the Asylum Demon, and that's why he thinks every single boss only has 1 or 2 attacks.
They're not fun to fight. You know, there's no... Dark Souls is nowhere near as innovative, as memorable, or as interesting as Zelda.
Bro, please give Nintendo's Meat a break. You're doing 360s on it right now.
The only reason it's talked about in the same breath is because people back 10 years ago were desperate to find something they can hold against Zelda.
That literally makes no sense at all, considering they're different styles of games entirely. Once again, one is a puzzle-focused type game for, like, more towards a younger audience, and the other is more of a mature-rated, boss fight-focused, combat-focused game. One is more focused upon precise timing when it comes to dodging and trial and error difficulty, whereas the other is more based upon using items you find within the world to solve puzzles.
That's kind of what it comes down to. It has nothing to do with like the actual quality of the games. It has nothing to do with like Zelda's path to becoming what it is now. It had nothing to do with like people getting bored of Zelda and just falling in love with Dark Souls for being better. It had nothing to do with any of that. Like, the people who love Dark Souls already hated Zelda.
I mean, speak for yourself, dude. I really enjoyed Elden Ring. It's one of my favorite games of all time, but one of my other favorite games of all time in recent history is Tears of the Kingdom. So apparently now, because I enjoyed Elden Ring, it means I fucking hate Tears of the Kingdom, which is just not true at all. Apparently this guy's just never heard of the concept of just enjoying two different series at the same time. It has to be one way or another for this guy.
They were already making excuses not to play Zelda. They were already, like, they were already doing everything in their power to avoid Nintendo consoles and avoid Nintendo games and, like, pretend that Nintendo stuff is for babies.
This is honestly like some middle school type stuff. Like, nobody out there is seriously saying that if you're a grown man and you play with Nintendo games or play Nintendo games that you are a baby. The only people that would say things like that are people who have been kicked in the head by a donkey.
Right? They were doing everything in their power to ignore all these great games that came out. And so when this game, which was directly influenced by Ocarina of Time, when this game comes out, which is kind of like Zelda, like, it becomes this huge phenomenon with them. Like, oh, it's Zelda, but it's not for babies, so it's safe for me to play.
Okay, two things I want to mention here. First of all, do you actually care what other people think of the video games you play? Like, if somebody thinks you're a baby because you play Zelda, who cares? Seriously, who gives a fuck? Oh my god, dude, I can't play Zelda, dude, because the grown man, the grown unwashed Redditor, might think that I'm a baby. Who gives a fuck? Last time I checked, the game was rated E for everyone, not C for children or I for infants. And second of all, people are not playing Dark Souls because it's Zelda, but not for babies. That is the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard in my life.
And look like I'm a hardcore gamer, right? Like, I'm gonna have cred when I actually beat this game. Like, when you take a step back and actually look at the Dark Souls phenomenon, you kind of realize that, like, it's not actually fun. It's not actually interesting. It's not actually engaging.
If it's not fun, it's not interesting, and it's not engaging, why did it create an entire genre of video games called Souls-like games? How come that's the case? How come if these games aren't interesting, they've been making them for the past 15, 16 years since Demon Souls? Could it possibly be that it's just you that don't find these games interesting and tons of other people do?
It doesn't actually challenge the player, right? You can find plenty of videos online about, like, what it's like fighting Gwyn at the end of Dark Souls, like, where all you have to do is just parry him twice, and you can just take him out with, like, no issues whatsoever.
Now, if you've actually played through Dark Souls 1, you would know why this is the case. It is meant to be that way. It is not meant to be a hard boss fight because of story reasons behind that boss fight. But, obviously this guy didn't make it past the Undead Burg, so he wouldn't know.
Everything about Dark Souls is just a complete mess. That's only propped up by speedrunners and people who are just obsessed with the IP because they think it makes them look cool, right? There is no actual merit to the gameplay, to the mechanics, to, like, the art style, to, like, the engine, to the formula. Like, Dark Souls is just not all that impressive. When you look at it objectively, games like Dark Souls, games like Skyrim, games like Dragon's Dogma, all of them pale in comparison to the real king of the fantasy adventure genre, The Legend of Zelda.
And that sums up this video. Basically, it's just peak fanboyism, peak meat riding, peak just corporate shilling for Nintendo. Basically, if this guy doesn't see a Nintendo logo on whatever game he's gonna play, he doesn't like the game. The game could be the best game of all time. It doesn't matter. He doesn't like it. But if it has a Nintendo logo on it, he automatically likes it, even if it's the most shit game of all time. So I don't think anything else needs to be said. It's just fanboys being fanboys. And with all that being said, peace.